When you serve in the military, you expect a lot of things: long deployments, tough environments, missing holidays with your family. What you don't expect is to come home and find out that the piece of land your family has owned for generations was stolen right out from under you by a bunch of power-hungry HOA board members. That's exactly what happened to me. Let me back up. My family has owned a large piece of rural property for well over 100 years. It wasn't just land, it was a legacy. My great-grandfather built the original farmhouse on it, my grandfather raised cattle there, and my father taught me how to shoot, fish, and live off the land in those rolling fields. To us, that land was more than dirt and grass. It was our roots, our history, and our home. Before I deployed overseas, I made sure everything was squared away. The taxes were paid, the land was legally secured in my name, and I even had it listed under the Service Members' Civil Relief Act protections, something that ensures no one can take legal action against your property while you're away serving. I left feeling confident that when I returned, everything would be exactly as I left it. But nothing could have prepared me for the betrayal I came back to. When my deployment ended, I was beyond excited to finally come home. I had visions of sitting on the porch again, drinking coffee while the sun rose over the fields, maybe even fixing up the old barn that had seen better days. Instead, when I pulled up to the property, I didn't see my land. I saw a sprawling subdivision. Houses, cookie-cutter, cheaply built, all packed together like sardines, covered the fields where my cattle once grazed. Streets with freshly painted names stretched across the land I grew up on. Kids were riding bikes in driveways that were built where my grandfather's barn used to stand. I sat in my truck, stunned into silence, thinking I had taken a wrong turn somewhere. But no. This was my land. And standing right at the entrance was a big, shiny HOA sign. Welcome to Oak Meadows Community, managed by the Oak Meadows Homeowners Association. My blood ran cold. I drove straight to the address listed for the HOA office, which was conveniently located inside the model home they were still showing to potential buyers. Inside, a smug-looking middle-aged woman wearing an oversized pearl necklace and holding a clipboard greeted me. She looked me up and down, military uniform still on, duffel bag slung over my shoulder, and with a fake smile, asked if I was there for a showing. I told her flatly, no. I'm here for an explanation. This is my land you're building on. Her smile froze, then twisted into something sharp. She introduced herself as the HOA president, and what came out of her mouth next made me clench my fists. She said, in the most condescending tone I've ever heard, "Actually, sir, this property was sold by the association while you were away. You must be mistaken if you think it still belongs to you." Mistaken? No. I wasn't mistaken. I had the paperwork. The deed. The tax records. The legal protections from the military. Everything was in order before I left. I tried to reason with her. I explained my family's history with the land, the legal documentation, and the fact that I had federal protection under the law. But she wasn't listening. She waved her hand dismissively and told me that the community had already invested too much to go back now. At that moment, I realized something. This wasn't ignorance. This was theft. Deliberate, calculated theft. They thought I would be gone long enough to not notice, or too powerless to fight back once I did. But they underestimated two things about me. I'm not the type to roll over when someone tries to take what's mine. I had the United States military on my side. And they were about to learn that the hard way. I left that model home with my fists clenched so tightly that my nails left marks in my palms. I couldn't believe what I had just witnessed. Some smug HOA president had the audacity to look me in the eye and claim my land was now theirs. I didn't even make it halfway down the road before I pulled over, sat in my truck, and forced myself to breathe. Getting angry wasn't going to fix this. I needed a plan. First step. Paperwork. I drove straight to the county records office. I had to see what they had on file. The clerk, a kind older gentleman who had clearly been working there for decades, pulled up my property records. Sure enough, the deed was still in my name. Paid in full. Taxes current. He frowned as he scrolled further and muttered, "That's strange." Apparently, 6 months into my deployment, a quitclaim deed had been filed transferring my property to something called the Oak Meadows Homeowners Association Development Fund. The signature on the document was supposed to be mine, but the second I looked at it, my jaw dropped. It wasn't even close to my handwriting. The signature was a clumsy forgery. The kind of thing a kid might try copying from a check. Sloppy, jagged, completely unlike the signature that had been on my enlistment papers, my mortgage, or my tax filings. The clerk shook his head and said quietly, "Son, you've been robbed." That hit me like a gut punch. But I wasn't broken. No, at that moment, I felt steel harden in my spine. I wasn't just going to get my land back. I was going to expose every single corrupt snake who thought they could profit off of a deployed soldier's absence. The next call I made was to the Judge Advocate General's office, the military legal branch, also known as JAG. I explained the situation to a captain who specialized in service member rights. The moment I mentioned the Service Members Civil Relief Act and a forged deed, his voice shifted from casual to razor-sharp. "This isn't just a civil issue," he told me. "This is fraud. Interstate property theft. Potential RICO violations if there's an organized group involved. And since you're active duty, it also falls under federal protection. Do not confront them again directly, we'll handle this properly." I felt like someone had just handed me a loaded cannon. The captain assigned a JAG team to review my documents. They requested copies of the deed, the supposed transfer, and any HOA paperwork I could dig up. That's when I started my second phase, investigation. I went back to Oak Meadows under the guise of being a prospective buyer. They didn't recognize me out of uniform, and the HOA president wasn't there that day. Instead, a realtor showed me around. I kept a straight face as I toured the houses, each one sitting on what used to be my family's soil. I asked harmless questions, pretending to be interested. "So how did this development get started? Who owned the land before?" The realtor casually said, "Oh, the HOA acquired it last year. A single owner sold it off, made a huge profit." I smiled politely, but inside I was boiling. Profit? Someone had pocketed money selling land that wasn't theirs to sell. And I had a strong suspicion who that someone was. Later that week, I managed to get my hands on HOA meeting minutes, public documents, since they had filed for certain permits. What I found made my stomach turn. They had openly discussed my land like it was some abandoned lot. The president had claimed I defaulted on taxes, and that the HOA had stepped in to assume ownership. That was a bald-faced lie. My taxes had been auto-paid through my bank, and I had receipts to prove it. Piece by piece, the puzzle was coming together. A forged deed. False claims of tax default. Fraudulent sale to a development fund. And dozens of families now living in houses built on stolen soil. But here's the thing, they thought they were untouchable. They thought no one would challenge them, least of all the soldier, who was supposed to be too busy overseas to notice. They had no idea I was about to bring the full weight of the military and federal law down on them. I met with my JAG contact again, and this time he brought in 2 more officers, a major and a civilian attorney who specialized in federal property law. When I handed over the HOA's meeting notes and the forged deed, the major actually laughed. "This is the sloppiest fraud I've seen in years," he said. "They are finished. We'll make an example out of them." But I wasn't satisfied with just proving fraud. No, I wanted to see justice delivered in a way that would leave them shaken for the rest of their lives. I wanted them to understand the cost of messing with someone who served. That's when the major leaned forward and said, "How would you like us to repossess the subdivision?" I blinked. "Repossess, you mean the whole thing?" He nodded. "Every house. Every street. Every square foot of land that was taken from you illegally. It all reverts to you once we prove fraud. Which means every homeowner, every buyer, every realtor, every single person involved. They're about to find out they don't own a single shingle on those roofs. It's all yours." For the first time since I'd returned home, I smiled. The HOA thought they were powerful. They thought they could bully one man. They forgot I wasn't just one man. I was a soldier with the US military behind me. And the storm was about to break right over their shiny little subdivision. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and legal filings. But behind all that boring administrative grind was a storm quietly brewing, one that the HOA didn't see coming. The JAG team didn't waste time. They coordinated with federal agencies, including the Department of Justice and the U.S. Marshals Service, because the case wasn't just about property anymore. It was about fraud, forgery, and theft that crossed state and federal lines. The HOA president and her board had turned my land into their personal cash machine, and they were about to pay for it. But here's the part that gave me the most satisfaction: they weren't even aware yet. As far as the HOA was concerned, they were still in control. They were still showing houses, still holding meetings about community beautification projects, still bossing around their residents with ridiculous fines about mailbox colors and grass length. They were living in a bubble of arrogance. Until the bubble popped. It started with a notice, one that the marshals had delivered directly to the HOA office. I wasn't there when they got it, but I heard later that the HOA president's face turned ghost white as she read the words. Notice of pending federal investigation and property repossession. The subdivision wasn't just in legal jeopardy, it was officially frozen. No more house sales. No more HOA fees collected. No new developments. Every single resident was told that their ownership of the property was being challenged because the original land had been acquired illegally. By the next day, chaos had erupted inside Oak Meadows. Residents were furious. They stormed the HOA office demanding answers. People who had sunk their life savings into those houses suddenly realized they might not own them at all. Some shouted that they wanted refunds, others threatened lawsuits. The smug president, who had once sneered at me, was now stammering excuses, trying to convince them everything would be resolved soon. But it wasn't going to be resolved in her favor. I showed up that weekend, not in uniform this time, but with my legal team beside me. When I walked into the meeting hall the HOA had rented, the entire room went silent. Dozens of homeowners stared at me as if I were the villain in this story, the man trying to take away their homes. I didn't blame them. From their perspective, I was the stranger threatening everything they had built. So I stood up and told them the truth. This land belonged to my family for over a century. While I was deployed overseas, your HOA president forged my signature, filed a false deed, and illegally sold off property that wasn't hers to sell. I didn't want this fight, but it was forced on me. The law is on my side. The military is on my side. And whether you like it or not, justice will be served. You could hear a pin drop. Some of the homeowners looked at me with sympathy. Others looked at me with rage. But one thing was clear, the spotlight had shifted from me to the HOA president. All eyes turned on her. And that's when the real fireworks began. The marshals entered the room, crisp uniforms, badges gleaming. They announced, in no uncertain terms, that Oak Meadows was now under federal repossession pending court proceedings. The HOA board members were escorted out of the room, some protesting loudly, others looking like they wanted to melt into the floor. I'll never forget the sight of the president being led away, her pearl necklace bouncing against her chest as she sputtered, "This is a mistake. I did nothing wrong." But the evidence spoke louder than her protests. The forged deed. The fraudulent tax claims. The financial records, showing HOA funds flowing into personal bank accounts. The case against her wasn't just airtight, it was devastating. In the weeks that followed, more layers of corruption came to light. It turned out the HOA president had been funneling money through shell companies, pocketing development fees, and even bribing a county official to push permits through faster. The entire scheme unraveled like a poorly knitted sweater. Meanwhile, Oak Meadows residents found themselves in limbo. Some were angry at me, others at the HOA, but most of them were simply stunned. They had no idea they had been pawns in a larger fraud. A few even apologized to me personally, saying they never would have bought the homes if they had known the truth. But as far as I was concerned, the matter wasn't over. It wasn't enough to see the HOA president arrested, or to watch the board collapse under legal pressure. No, I wanted to ensure that my family's land was restored in full, and that justice was carried out so thoroughly that no HOA in the country would ever dare try something like this again. That's when my JAG contact said something that stuck with me. "You've won the legal battle. But now comes the part where we show them what happens when you cross the military." And that's exactly what was about to happen. Because repossession wasn't just a word on paper, it was a reality. The subdivision was going to be cleared. And when it was, every single person, every corrupt board member, every crooked realtor, every complicit county official, was going to remember the day the United States military repossessed Oak Meadows. The court proceedings were brutal, for the HOA, that is. For me, it was like watching justice carve its way through a wall of lies. The forged deed. Exposed by handwriting experts, who testified under oath that the signature was laughably fake. The tax default claims. Debunked by bank records, showing my automatic payments were made every single year, on time. The HOA's financial dealings. Torn apart by forensic accountants who traced hundreds of thousands of dollars into the president's personal accounts, her husband's consulting firm, and even her daughter's college tuition. Every time another piece of evidence was revealed, the president's face grew redder. Her smug arrogance had melted into desperation. She had walked into court wearing pearls and heels. By the third week of trial, she looked like a ghost, hollow-eyed, shoulders slumped, beaten by the truth. And then came the ruling. The judge's words still ring in my ears. The land transfer was fraudulent. The subdivision was built illegally on property that was never for sale. Therefore, full ownership reverts to the lawful title holder immediately. Furthermore, the HOA president and board are guilty of conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery, and theft. Sentencing will follow. Just like that, Oak Meadows wasn't Oak Meadows anymore. It was mine again. But here's the kicker, the ruling didn't just restore the land. It voided every single sale contract tied to the subdivision. That meant every house, every street, every lot, legally, they all belonged to me now. The fallout was chaos. Families who had bought homes were in shock. Some packed up and left overnight, not wanting to be caught in the middle of a scandal. Others begged me to let them stay, offering to pay rent. A few cursed me to my face, blaming me for a mess they hadn't asked for. I understood their anger, but the truth was, they had been victims too, just pawns in the HOA's greed. As for the president and her cronies, they didn't just lose power. They lost everything. The Department of Justice filed federal charges. The county official who had taken bribes was indicted. The development fund was seized. The president was sentenced to years in prison, along with restitution payments that would keep her in debt for the rest of her life. And me. I had a choice. I could bulldoze the subdivision, erase it completely, and restore the land to the way my grandfather had left it. Or I could turn the tables and use what had been built for something better. I chose a little of both. Some of the houses came down, the ones built over sacred parts of my family's land, like where the barn once stood, or where my father and I had planted a grove of oaks decades ago. I reclaimed those spots, preserved them as they should be. But other homes, I repurposed them. I allowed families who had truly been innocent in the whole mess to stay, under fair leases, with no HOA nonsense, no arbitrary fines, no power-hungry board breathing down their necks. They paid directly to me, and the money went back into restoring the ranch, fixing up the farmhouse, and honoring the land's history. Word spread quickly in the surrounding towns. The story of how a deployed soldier had his land stolen by an HOA, only to have the military repossess an entire subdivision, became something of a legend. People shook my hand in grocery stores, thanked me for standing up not just for myself, but for service members everywhere. Veterans told me it gave them hope, knowing that the protections we have on paper actually mean something when put to the test. And me. I finally got to sit on that porch again. Coffee in hand, sun rising over the fields. The sound of silence, no HOA barking orders, no construction crews tearing up the soil, just the land breathing again. I thought back to the day I first came home, when I pulled up and saw my land covered in houses, and I remembered the cold fury I'd felt. Now, that fury was gone, replaced by peace. I had fought and won, not just for the land, but for my family's legacy. Oak Meadows was no more. The HOA was destroyed. The subdivision had been repossessed. And my land, our land, was home again.